I just want to remind everybody, if anyone is sitting in the back, please move forward. And if you have any questions during this panel, please text your questions to the address that will be shown on the screen. And as a courtesy to our panel members, we would also ask that you silence your communication devices at this time. I would like to welcome you to the Women in AFCEA panel. Senior leaders address setting cybersecurity priorities, and the reception will follow the panel. I am introducing Ms. Stephanie Hutch. Stephanie is the Vice President of Strategic Planning at P3I Incorporated in Boston area, and she is also a member of the AFCEA Lexington Concord chapter. She is also the co-chair of Women in AFCEA, heading up initiatives and events at the AFCEA international level. She has been in the Women Outreach Leader at the chapter for the past 2 years. Stephanie has also been successful at pairing mentors with young women professionals and creating an AFCEA event around a Women in STEM panel comprised of local military and industry women. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome Stephanie Hutch.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Stephanie Hutch. I am the co-chair of Women in AFCEA International and also the Vice President of Strategic Planning with P3I Incorporated. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And on behalf of AFCEA International, I'd like to welcome you to our 3rd annual Women in Cyber panel at the TechNet Indo-Pacific Conference. Women in AFCEA hosts 3 Women in Cyber panels throughout the year. We have one at our TechNet Cyber Conference in Baltimore, and then again TechNet Augusta in Augusta, Georgia, and then also here at the TechNet Indo-Pacific Conference in Hawaii. In addition to these panels, we also host an annual Women's Appreciation event at our AFCEA West Conference in San Diego. Event information and dates can be found on the AFCEA.org website, and I encourage you to go look that up and put those on your calendars. This panel, just so you know, has been approved for several CEUs or continuing education credits, but you do need to stay for the full hour to earn those credits. Please be sure to get your badge scanned in the back at the end of the panel, and they cannot be scanned later, so please make sure you do that immediately following this event. The panel today will be followed by a Meet the Panelists reception starting at 4:30 here in this room, the South Pacific Ballroom. Be sure to collect your drink ticket at the end of the panel, and that can be used at the reception. Roseanne and Bill Cinnamon, are you in the back? Yep. They will have your drink tickets, so please make sure you stop by and see them to get your drink ticket for the reception. All Women in AFCEA events across our international network, the events, the panels, and the receptions are made possible by a joint sponsorship by Walker & Associates and Sienna Corporation. So I want to extend our sincere thanks to those organizations for making these events possible. Thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today of this panel, Ms. Juliana Vida. Juliana is the Chief Technical Advisor for the Public Sector at Splunk, Inc., providing guidance and direction to the developer, cloud, and ISV ecosystems as a thought leader and technology evangelist. Prior to joining Splunk, Juliana was a vice president in Gartner Executive Programs, leading a team of executive partners supporting federal government chief information officers and IT senior leaders. Juliana also spent 24 years in the U.S. Navy, serving at sea and onshore as both a combatant ship driver and helicopter pilot, culminating in serving as the Navy's deputy CIO in the Pentagon. Juliana is a current member of Women in Technology and Women in Defense, and volunteers with local chapters of Girls Who Code and Girls on the Run. In her spare time, she is an accomplished triathlete, marathoner, and a TV game show champion. Yay. So thank you so much, Juliana, for loaning us your time and talent today, and we look forward to a wonderful discussion. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. This is a great crowd. I'm really excited to see so many faces in the room. I'd like to start with some thank yous as well. I'd like to, again, thank our sponsors, Jane Brightwell and Lisa Smiley here from Walker & Associates, and Sienna Corporation. Do we have anyone here from Sienna? Thank you very much. We really appreciate your sponsorship. And Stephanie Hutch, thank you so much for being here as the co-chairperson of the Women in AFCEA from AFCEA International. We appreciate that you made the trip to be here, and thank you for that warm introduction as well, and the support of Women in AFCEA from the international organization. I'd also like to thank the AFCEA Hawaii Educational Foundation, who helped to put on this fantastic event. And I'd also like to thank Miss Linda Newton. Linda is the AFCEA Hawaii Chapter Women's Outreach Leader, but personally for me, she's been a mentor and a friend and has really helped me in my career and has been such a champion for women in technology. So thank you, Linda. And I'd like to finally note that for the participation in the panel today, the moderator, myself, and all the panelists will have a donation made on our behalf to Women Who Code. So thank you very much to AFCEA for that. That's fantastic. You all probably saw either the flyer or on the app the names of the panelists, but I'll go ahead and briefly thank the panelists for being here today. To my left, of course, is Vice Admiral Nancy Norton. She has the longest titles, so she is the Director of DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency, and the Commander of Joint Force Headquarters, DODIN. So thank you, Admiral Norton. And next to... And then we have Miss Connie Lau. Connie is the President and CEO of Hawaiian Electric Industries. Thank you so much for being here today, Miss Lau. And Miss Ruth Youngs-Liu, the Navy's PEO-EIS, PEO-EIS. Thank you very much, Ruth. Ruth Youngs-Liu. We're just keeping it real here today on the panel. It's fine. And then finally we have Miss Jodi Ito, who is the CISO at University of Hawaii. Thank you very much for representing. Okay, so we're gonna inject a little fun here with a little icebreaker and let you get to know some of the panelists on a little bit of a personal note and break the ice. So what I asked each person to think about was, as they walk up on stage, what is the song that they would like to be playing, in the background? What's your walk-up song? So I'll start, but there's some pretty good songs. There's not gonna be any singing or interpretive dance, but. My song is actually, maybe later. Yeah, that's right, at the reception. So my song, I wanted to pick something funky and cool, but then I started listening to lyrics and I was like, inappropriate, not good, So I picked a song from a Disney movie. My song is Speechless from Aladdin, the Aladdin movie. And basically it's Princess Jasmine, asserting her claim to the throne in front of Jafar and all the bad guys. And basically it's about not being silenced. Like, you can't keep me quiet, don't keep me down, and power to the women. So Speechless is my song. Admiral Norton?
All right, well, you heard my title, that I am responsible for a lot of the cybersecurity across the Department of Defense. And so that means I am fighting the bad guys in cyberspace every day. And so my walk-up song is I Won't Back Down.
Nice. Okay, so for me, since we are in Hawaii, I said, you gotta have the theme from Hawaii 5-0. And it's definitely Speechless, Juliana, because there's no words to the song.
Well, you guys were really fast with your stories. So I struggled with it a little bit. Actually, one popped into my head immediately, but I had to go out and consult with my peeps and get some feedback. And the best suggestions that came in were California Dreamin', because I had spent 30 years in San Diego, couple years out here, and I'm now in DC. So, but that's not it. That's not it. The next was she works hard for her money, and I said yes. But my walk-up song really is, and this is why I struggled with this, because it sounds so unprofessional, but Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper.
Hey, that's okay.
But truly, it's because it's guided my career. My very first job in the Navy was, shall we say, uninspiring, and so after that, every job that I've taken throughout my career, I've been asking, is it something I'm going to love doing? Is it something I'm going to wake up and look forward to going to work with? And am I going to have fun at this job? And indeed, almost every job, except Y2K, I've had to. So, Girls Just Want to Have Fun.
Okay, so that's a very tough act to follow, so let's see if this will actually work. And the reason is because we are all champions to make sure we keep our cyberspace safe. Everything we touch, every day, everywhere we go, there's a cyber component to it. And so how do we infuse all of that knowledge into everybody, our young ones, our parents, our grandparents, because it really touches us, and we all have to be champions for it.
Fantastic.
All right, thank you very much, ladies, for exposing yourselves in that way and giving us some laughs, too. Okay, so now we're going to switch to some actual cybersecurity content questions, although, Jodi, you're the overachiever. We're just going to say. You had the audio, you gave the cyber tie-in. We love it. So, oh, and by the way, you see the note on the board there to text your questions. I will be kind of popcorning back and forth between questions for the panel and questions from the audience. So please don't wait till the end. When we see them come up, if I don't think they're bad, I'll ask the question from the audience. No, they're all good questions. All good questions. Okay. So first question, and this is I'm going to start with Admiral Norton, and then we'll go down the line. But so we're going to talk about cyber vulnerability. So it seems like vectors of cyber vulnerability are exposed every day, many times a day, internally and externally. However, we know that time, money, and other valuable resources that are necessary to confront them continue to be limited. So against this resource backdrop, how do you balance the attention your organization pays to external threats, like hackers and critical infrastructure attacks, and internal threats, such as malicious insiders and careless users? Admiral Norton?
Well, of course, we have to do both. You know, we can't only look at one vector of our attack surface, and so we absolutely have to think about what is it that we are doing in our network that can allow us to be as well protected as we possibly can be from an insider threat and from an external threat wherever possible. So things that we're doing to protect our network that do both are a great return on our investment. But we absolutely have to be looking at what are the external threats that are happening to us, and how do we manage those? How do we defeat the external malicious cyber actors at every venue? Because we know that we have nation-state actors, we have people who are trying to get at our networks for profit, and we have hackers that are trying desperately to get to our networks for reputation reasons, if no other reason, just for fun. And so all of those have to be things that we're focusing on, and we are doing that. So we do that from our perimeter defense and our mid-tier defense and our endpoint security. But then looking from the other way out as well, looking at our internal users and understanding what are we doing to protect the insider who has absolutely no intention of being an insider threat, but becomes one because they are careless, thoughtless, not recognizing the fact that they are operating on a weapon system. They are operating on our cyber platform, and that is something that is critical. Oftentimes we think of it as just the same computer system as we use at home, and therefore they can do anything they want to do on our government computers in the Department of Defense networks. We can't operate that way, and we can't allow users to think that way, and we have to really change the threat vectors from that. So we're doing things within DISA like cloud-based internet isolation, for example, that takes the threat off of the endpoint and puts all of that web browsing in a commercial cloud. And so the kinds of access that would come through and potentially have malware on it doesn't get into our networks. It's all executed in the cloud. So that's really disabling the insider's ability to be part of the problem unintentionally. The way I look at it is, if we are expecting every one of our users to be 100% compliant in order for our networks to be secure, we are going to fail every day. Because we know that our users are always going to be making mistakes. We all make mistakes. Our system administrators make mistakes. We can't assume that our users are going to do everything that we told them to do exactly how we told them to do it all of the time. So we build in the technology as much as we possibly can to prevent that. We're also doing things like improving our user training through updates to the Cybersecurity Awareness Challenge that DISA is responsible for putting out across the DoD. And that training venue goes out to about 5 million users. And we just did a major revision of that this last year to increase the awareness, to change up the scenarios and get people to really think differently about the problems, and again, about what they're responsible for, how they're accessing a weapon system in the cyber platform, and what that means. And so you have to do both. You also have to look for the insider threat that is intentionally trying to get onto our networks, and what does that mean? So some of the endpoint security capabilities that we're putting on, but that's also monitoring our users' behavior, the insider threat program, and understanding where we might have vulnerabilities, where the people may actually be intentionally trying to do things that are unusual activity on our network. And there are a lot of new capabilities for recognizing what looks unusual on our networks. And if you're looking at that from a network activity and data access perspective, then we get a better view of that.
Great, thanks. And I'd love to hear, Connie, from the industry perspective, what about the balance?
So for those of you who don't know Hawaiian Electric Industries, we're actually the holding company for two operating companies. One is Hawaiian Electric, which is the electric utility that serves 95% of the state of Hawaii. And then we have the third largest bank, American Savings Bank. So the two entities, as you can tell, are heavily regulated and also really critical to the economy. And so for us, cybersecurity is one of those things that we pay a huge amount of attention to. The regulators on both sides of the house, the FIFIAC on the banking side with Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and then we're regulated by the Federal Reserve at the holding company level, and then of course the utility on the public utility side. Both were working with their regulators on various standards to protect against cybersecurity. I think it made it a lot easier for all of us when NIST came out and put standards in place for all industries. And so both of our companies really follow those standards and build to those standards. And as you all know, there's certain minimal levels within the standards that are both internal and external oriented. And so we are doing both. There's little doubt that one has to do both. And you know, we're always advised that you can shut down 80 or 90% of the risk by just following some of these best practices. And so I think from industry's perspective, a lot of the things that we focus on is just making sure that we put in place those best practices. And it doesn't just stop with the best practices, because a lot of the best practices are actually fairly low tech, low resource items like training and teaching your employees not to click on the wrong links, and respond to phishing attacks. But it is constant with us because even when you get to that basic level, one of the tenets that business follows all the time is risk-based assessments. We are always having to constantly evaluate the risks and decide as we hear what the increasing threat levels are to gear up to address those specific threats. You know, simple example, you know, our company is actually quite good at training on phishing. And if you fail your test, you know, it can actually result in termination because our business runs critical infrastructure, and it's so important that our people don't allow in those vulnerabilities. When we run some of the phishing tests, we'll get down to 2 or 3% click rates. But then along comes a holiday or some great sporting event or music event that everybody wants tickets to, or they want to go out and get the latest discount. And all of a sudden, you know, the click rates jump up to 10%, you know. And so it's constant. It's just totally constant. On the risk-based side, I would say, particularly on our utility side, you know, there are some risks, particularly, I think this audience will know how high the threat levels are from nation-state actors, that some of those risks are so high, but those are risks that are actually in a way beyond an individual commercial enterprise. They really get into the area of national security. And so what we do is we work very closely with our partners in the federal agencies, whether it's the Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, DOD, US Indo-PACOM, to work on those kinds of vulnerabilities and risks and have really good practices around information sharing. Right now in our industry, what we found was through the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, our electricity ISAC, all of the information was coming out of the intelligence communities in an unclassed format to our businesses. But we all are aware that with all the nation-state discussion that's going on, that the threat, which used to be outside of our borders, with cyber, there are no borders, and now critical infrastructure within the United States is a target. We clearly feel we're a target since we supply all the electricity to US Indo-PACOM and the component services that are based here on Oahu. And so it's really important that we build those partnerships, we build those information systems, and so we're now working on trying to help government understand and be able to see what is going on in the systems of critical infrastructure, because you know you all don't have those authorities to do that unless we allow you in. And so we're working to build that. Of course, we have to protect our customer data, and we have commercial interests that we have to protect. But those are the kinds of discussions that we are always having. It is always a balance between costs. This is one of those areas that I think we could all just keep spending, and we would never totally shut down the risk. So it's all about making those risk-based decisions on what do we have to spend to at least bring the risk levels to a level that might be acceptable.
Thanks so much, and I know the audience can really appreciate you made the comment about holding people accountable, you know, if they continue to fail the phishing test, and you can terminate. Of course, the government has some unique challenges in that regard, but there's always the element of holding people accountable, and to Admiral Norton's point, it's a weapon system, so let's, you know, hold people accountable to protecting it. And the other point you made about information sharing, for those of you that were in the keynote luncheon yesterday, that was Admiral Davidson's key message, was the importance of information sharing with allies and partners, and I love that to hear that from you as well. So it's not just the DoD's perception of the importance of information sharing, but industry too, so thank you. Ruth?
So just to build a little bit, I agree 100% with what you both said. building a little bit on what Nancy was talking about, both the insider and the outsider threats. We have, inadvertent, as Nancy was saying, inadvertent insider threats where people don't intend to do something, but they do. And so in addition to the things that she talked about, like the CBII, the secure browsers, we're also looking at, we're in the Navy actually are a pathfinder for Comply to Connect for the overall DoD. And that's not just taking the tools, because there's a lot of tools available out there, but it's also working through what are the policies and how are we actually going to implement those in a manner that will allow us to then secure our workstations, secure our devices. And with that, it's, as we go forward, because we have a lot of machines that may be off the network for a while, people are on travel, we have machines that go into a closet for exercises or for real-world events where they don't come out until they're actually needed. So we have a lot of those types of things, and in this way, we'll be able to ensure when things come back on that they're at the right configuration level, properly patched, and are not going to pose a threat then to our networks.
Great. Okay, thanks. And Jodi, from the higher education perspective?
So actually, I like being at the end because they kind of said mostly everything. However, our environment is so uniquely different in that we have to provide an open and unfettered network access to most of our communities. Students bring in your own devices, faculty, we have visiting faculty that come in and out. We have community members that just come in and want to use our library but still connect to our network. So we actually have to be able to accommodate all of those different communities. But what we do is, again, taking the risk-based approach is really trying to secure those information systems and processes to be separated from our general network. So my basic underlying philosophy is the university's network is already compromised, right? And so with that, how do we protect those things like our personnel information systems, our student information systems, our financial information systems, and also our research? We as an academic institution, we're all over the news about how universities are losing intellectual property, and yes, we are one of them. But it really brings to light the fact that we have to make sure everybody is aware. So talking about the awareness and training perspective of it, our researchers, even though it's what we call open source research, they can share it with anybody, they still have to know that they're targets and that we actually have had individual projects targeted by nation states. So collectively, it's understanding the risk and making sure that everybody else understands that risk and why we have to force compliance in certain areas of our network. Some of it is technical, and as was mentioned before, you can throw a lot of money at technical solutions, and you'll never see the end of it. So you have to make your choices very selectively. What will give you the best return on your investment? Because again, we just don't have unlimited funds. We are a public education institution, and we also have to face our legislators if we take missteps. One of the things with the University of Hawaii, we are a state agency. So anytime there is a breach of personally identifiable information, we have to report to our legislators. So that is something that is forefront, and we put it in front of our community every day. You don't want to be the one that forces us to do a legislative report, do you? And it really forces them to think in a different way. So.
Thanks. Before we go, I know we have some questions from the audience coming in. That's fantastic. Jodi, I just want to ask real quickly, you mentioned you're a state agency, so you have to report. Out of curiosity, when there's an incident, do you have the resources of the National Guard or those type of resources that you can bring in?
So I sort of smile because that is something that we are currently discussing among the state agencies. And so I have some of our colleagues here in the audience, and it is something about jurisdiction and at what point it would get triggered. I know Connie Lau has been in those discussions also. I know that they were able to do it in Colorado when they had their incident with the emergency management thing. So it's a state-by-state initiative, and it has interesting ramifications and jurisdictional issues involved with it. So at this moment, we don't have that available to us.
Okay, but under discussion. Go ahead, ma'am.
But when you think about some of the impact that we've had with some ransomware, This is something that we really, as a nation, need to be very seriously considering, is what is the role of our National Guard in protecting certainly the critical infrastructure like HECO, but our cities, our counties, our hospitals that are suffering from this ransomware that is rampant. And unfortunately, it almost always comes in through phishing.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I think we have a few questions coming in. Could you put one of those up there? Excellent. Okay.
And send it around to everyone.
The question is, Japan is paranoid about cyber attacks on their critical infrastructure interrupting the Olympics next year. What advice would you give them? Who wants to give advice to Japan? Go.
Well, I'll tell you, I just came back from an international electricity summit in Fukuoka, and it was the United States, Australia, Japan, the Europeans, Australians, and yes, all of us across the globe that run electric grids are very concerned about keeping critical infrastructure up. I think one of the things that I would suggest is we have been building partnerships across critical infrastructure because, one can't just think about the electrical grid. You also have to think about telecommunications and the water systems. It's all interlinked. We particularly see that here in Hawaii, where we're all in such close proximity. And so we're trying to build partnerships across critical infrastructure so that we can share best practices and enhance all of our systems. I think the other thing that I would mention, and the Europeans in particular were very, very interested in the incredibly strong partnership that we've been building with the federal agencies to be able to do the information sharing and to talk about can you take advantage of this change in philosophy where DoD can be forward-leaning to help with critical infrastructure. However, I will say we all do realize that if there was really an attack going on, your resources are probably gone. So we really enjoy being able to tap into the expertise and to be able to learn and employ some of those techniques on our systems today. But I think that's the best advice I'd give to them, is build those partnerships cross-sector and with government.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll throw in that, one of the things that we definitely need to do that I would recommend that they do is increasing the ability and speed at which they share information, and not just internal to Japan and the critical infrastructure at Japan, but other nations and other industries as well. So it's something that we have gotten, we've gotten much better at. I certainly won't say that we're really good yet, but we've gotten much better at across the government, federal government, state and local government, and some of our really critical infrastructure partners. But it's something we need to increasingly get better at with industry as well. So raise your hand if you're here from industry. It looks like, it's about half and half. So for those of you who are in industry, think about how you can participate better with some of these information sharing capabilities that we have for what's happening on your networks, as well as what you're aware of because of the work that you do.
Great, thanks.
So
Actually,
can
go
I
ahead, please.
add, Nancy, not to be controversial, but yeah, why not? I will say, the experience that I've had is that it is not easy. What we've been working on with the Department of Energy is putting sensors on our system that can then collect the information and put it up into the networks where the national labs can assist in analytics. And then the issue is when they do the analytics, and let's assume that we agree to share that up into the intelligence community, what we're starting to run into is that every single agency has different authorities and can only look at certain pieces of the information, so it gets so complicated on figuring out how do you segment all that information so that, you know, agency A that has a certain authorization can look at that piece, and agency B can look at the piece that is relevant to them. So I think we unfortunately have a lot of work in cyber issues within the United States to do.
So I actually want to segue from this conversation and the importance of partnership and relying on both industry and government and talk about some positives there. So the question is, with cybersecurity technology or processes, if you're from the government, what do you think industry does well? And if you are from industry, what do you think government does well? And we were talking about this earlier, and it seemed like it was going to be a pretty interesting and positive conversation. So putting you on the spot again, Connie, I'd like to start with you and what you think government does well in terms of cybersecurity.
So I actually think that government does an incredibly good job of classification of information and then segmentation of that. And that's something that we try to do within our business and be able to protect, as Jodi said, certain of the more critical information. What has impressed me is the understanding that seems to run throughout government around these classification systems and how far each person can go or not go. Generally within commercial businesses, that kind of discipline doesn't necessarily exist. So that's something that and when I got your question, I was talking with some of our tech folks about that, and our CIO and CISO, and they agree that that would be something that we could definitely learn from government.
Great. Love to hear it. Ruth, I think you had a couple things on your list about you, what you thought. Or no, that was the other one. I'm sorry. So, but do you have anything that you think that industry does well, that government can learn from?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the grass is always greener on the other side. And so we were joking earlier about, well, what does government do well?
Right.
And we do actually do a lot of things really well. But for industry, really, you know, I sit here on this side and I'm envious at the speed at which industry can move and the innovation that you can bring to bear. And we do have a lot of labs that bring innovation, but we just can't typically move at that speed. Although we are getting better with things, you know, like OTAs and the ability to go out and contract and do prototyping and that kind of thing. So we're getting better at that. But really, just the speed and the innovation, the automation that you have to bear already and that we're bringing to bear, those kinds of things I think are huge, as well as, you know, other things that we're working to adopt on things like DevSecOps, and we're making progress there, but we're not, I would say it's pockets of progress as opposed to whole-scale implementation that we're seeing out in industry today. So lots of great things that industry does well that we're working and running as fast as we can to catch up. In fact, for our own, within my PEO and our strategic plan, a big part of that is doing things more like industry when it comes to IT and services.
Great, thanks. And Jodi, you're kind of in a unique, I was like quasi-government, you know, you can pick. You can pick industry or government,
so
whichever.
I'll do both. Because one, I will actually kind of just contest that government doesn't move fast. Because how many of you as defense contractors are aware of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification that's supposed to be rolled out January 2020? This is the fastest I have ever seen a government certification program roll out, and it's scaring the bejesus out of me. Because I don't even know how it's going to be applied to the University of Hawaii. And if we don't do well, we will lose government contracts, right? Specifically DoD beginning. However, I can see this rolling out to the rest of the federal agencies. And it is moving at lightning speed. So from that, yes, government can move very quickly. But what you also do very well, I think, is the ability to execute, right? You can plan, coordinate, do things, set up your logistics in a way that is so efficient And I think those are things that we as a university, as a state agent, can learn from. A lot of our business practices, would say. How many of you have done business with the University of Hawaii or state agencies? Okay, it's a little bit of an onerous process. And so we understand that too. So we do share a lot of the government types of complexities and issues. But I really think that there is so much that we can learn from each other. And it's, again, this partnership that we have to be able to engage and have those discussions. And some of them are going to be really hard. Like, I really want to yell at the people developing the CMMC at this moment. But it is important because we need it. There's a reason why it's going through at such a quick pace. But again, we need more information to be shared with us more liberally.
And Admiral Norton?
Thank you. Well, first I want to say thank you very much for both Connie and Jodi sharing those good things that government does, because we tend to bash ourselves too much, I think, and I would have never had that perspective certainly from Connie, and I would not have thought about the speed aspect, the positive speed aspect of the cybersecurity maturity model. So it is good to hear that. Ruth and I, we've spent too much time together because I think we share a brain when we sit on panels together and have a lot of the same perspective. So what I think industry does really well is innovation and delivery of new capability rapidly and oftentimes without having to wait for us to define our requirements well, because that takes us a long time to define our requirements. And so oftentimes what industry does is you throw something out there, and maybe it's exactly what we want or close enough, and we've learned to do that. So one of the things that we're doing at DISA is we're following an ABC model, an adopt, buy, and create model. And that means that we're taking what's already out there in DoD and adopting it to the new mission set or the new mission partner that has this requirement. Or we're buying something that you already have that may be the 80% solution, and figuring out, can we use that at least for a while and potentially make some modifications or some minor adjustments to add to that to get it to the 90-95%, whatever it is that we're looking for. And only last do we create new things that are specific to our unique requirements, because that is not efficient. That is not what we do well, and it takes us far too long. We're, particularly in the IT world and absolutely in the cybersecurity world, we're always behind if we're creating a new solution from scratch and asking you to do that for us. So industry is I couldn't adopt this model if it wasn't for the things that industry does well in providing those solutions for us.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone, for those great ideas. I know we have a bunch of questions piling up, so go ahead. All right. There are at least 16 areas listed by the federal government as critical infrastructure. What do each of you consider the top 3 for funding purposes? Top 3 critical infrastructures for funding purposes. Okay, who wants to start?
I'm happy to start. So one of the things that I do is I chair the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, which is a presidential advisory council that looks at the security of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors and their information systems. And so and we have representation on the council from across those 16 sectors, and whether I want to admit it or not, every time, number 1 comes back to the electric system. Number 2 usually goes to communications. And number 3, gets spread a little bit more, but it actually ends up oftentimes being financial services, because you need financial services to keep the economy running.
Okay. Anyone else?
So being from Hawaii, I'm going to pitch transportation as being one of the top 3. We rely on our harbors to bring in the majority of our goods, and if our harbor systems goes down, we're really up a creek. Some of you might have been here in Hawaii when there was a strike, a shipping strike, a dock strike, and that everybody was stocking up on toilet paper. So, I mean, really, it does hit home when we can't get our goods. So, besides electricity and communications, I do transportation for Hawaii.
I would just concur. I mean, just based upon, when I was out here at Pac Fleet and the exercises that we went through, I would agree with exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Same, okay, so that was 4. So we got, electricity, communications, financial services, and transportation. So that's good to know. Good question, thank you. Let's go ahead and take another one. Got another one queued up? Of course. Woo! Okay, industry representatives sometimes say that to acknowledge cyber risk too publicly or share awareness too broadly is a risky strategy. It's safer from the liability perspective to simply be compliant to NIST. Is this a perspective you've heard or an approach you've seen? Isn't this a self-defeating strategy given rapidly evolving cyber threats? So pretty good question, and that does often come up. So I think I have to start with Admiral Norton.
Well, the hard part about this is who are we sharing with publicly? Are we sharing this with a friendly audience, or are we sharing this with our adversaries? And that's what's hard, is when you say, well, we want to share our risks and our vulnerabilities so that we can increase awareness. Sometimes that means we're giving away exactly what our cyber adversaries are looking for and trying to figure out how to target better. And so we have to look for the forums in a semi-private way that we can talk about it, as well as raising public awareness across the board and getting the general public to understand the very risks that we're under all of the time at a more generic manner. But part of that is we have to not just be thinking about the things that everybody would already assume in terms of like the critical infrastructure that we just talked about, but also the things that the general public is exposed to and is using every day that can make our nation more susceptible to cyber risks as well. And so the kinds of things that are going on to raise general public awareness of whether that's Internet of Things and what does cybersecurity mean for those kinds of capabilities, so that we get to the point where the general public is expecting and demanding cybersecurity be built into the very systems that are delivered to them to be using, and doing that in a way that scares the general public into worrying about it without giving away real specific vulnerabilities to our adversaries.
Great, thanks. And I'd actually like to go to Jodi next, because Jodi is the Chief Information Security Officer at the university, and so this is right in her wheelhouse.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, you have a very unique customer base, let's say. You have
absolutely.
the public, you have students, you
Yes.
have paying parents, you
Yes.
have staff. So
Yes.
what's your take on this?
So we actually do a broad bit of sharing, but in a more closed space. So for example, how many of you know we have 5 data breaches and class action lawsuit back in 2010? So we talk broadly about that event, but the details of each of those breaches and how it occurred, we try to keep that into a little bit more closed space in terms of like talking with other higher education institutions so that they can help protect themselves from being in the situations that we are. So generally, we will make sure that when we talk very specific details, like the technical down to the nuts and bolts level of what actually happened, we try to make sure that's not recorded, that it's in a space that it's a controlled environment where we know who we're speaking to. So that's, again, being part of it. But we will talk broadly about the events and just to make people aware, because as you said, we have to communicate with the public as why did the university have information that was publicly accessible, or did we issue a breach notification letter to all of the members of the University of Hawaii community. So we do have those dual hats. But to the point where we really do need to share information. I think from the technical aspect, when you're talking about, this particular IP is attacking with this particular signature so that you can create a rule in your firewall so that you can prevent it from occurring to your organization. I think that can be done in a relatively sanitized way so that you might not be able to attribute who's doing the initial reporting. And because you can do that in an automated way, it becomes very important to share that information very broadly. So as part of the information sharing and analysis centers, I know each one has their way of pushing out that sort of threat information out to their communities. And then it's up to us to contribute to that. And so one of the questions I actually asked of some of our federal friends is, there is classified information that you have about threats. Can you sanitize that and push that out to an ISAC, where we don't necessarily know the original source, but we can still ingest that to protect our environments? So those are the things, working together, we have to get better at very quickly. And to the people who do, the researchers who look up vulnerabilities, Google and Samsung fix Android spying flaw. Other makers may still be vulnerable. This is important for our general community to know. They need to know what device they have that may have a vulnerability that can record everything that you say and do, even when the app is not running. So if you take a phone into a meeting that has intellectual property implications, you really need to understand the vulnerabilities and make sure that that is patched on those devices. So I'm coming at it from a whole lot of different sides, but again, this is the broad spectrum that we're facing.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you coming today because it sounds like you have a lot on your plate and you have a lot going on. Ruth or Connie, anything to add to this particular question?
No, really not a whole lot. I think they hit it really well, because for us, it truly is the difference between understanding the threats out there and sharing the threats, even if you have to hide the source of the information, versus sharing your vulnerabilities, which we don't. That's one of the things that we just don't want to do.
Yep.
Right.
So this is a very interesting question to me, because most definitely within business discussions, when cybersecurity first started becoming such a big issue, most businesses did not want to disclose breaches. And I think over time, and you've seen many of the agencies, for example, we're a publicly traded company, the SEC wants to force disclosure of these kinds of breaches, and there's all kinds of discussions about exactly what do you disclose so that you don't increase the level of the risk. And I think as I say, the question's an interesting one, because where it ends up about trying to hold things in being a self-defeating strategy, I think that's certainly where I've come to after all these years, that you can't really hold all that information in. Because you need to be moving to shut down the risks as quickly as you can. So you can't worry just about liability, because the liability issues could get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So.
Yeah, great point. Thanks so much, and thank you for everybody for submitting your questions. They're really good. I'm going to pivot, though. I'm going to invoke moderator privilege, and I'm going to go back to a question that we had prepared for, and that's because it has to do with workforce. And I think I know everyone on the stage, probably most of you in the audience, are struggling with the talent gap, and how do we fill all of these jobs that we have in the U.S. without the numbers, frankly, the numbers of students coming through U.S. schools to take these jobs. So I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about, particularly about how it relates to girls and women, because this is a women panel, but it is not a girls and women issue. It is a U.S. talent gap issue. And so I wanted to talk specifically about how each organization is tackling this challenge. I think there's this assumption that industry doesn't have this problem, that we can hire everyone we want and we have endless flows of money, and that's not true either. So I think it'll be important to hear from all the panelists about how you're addressing the recruiting, hiring, and retention of the adequate talent in cybersecurity in the U.S. And I was going to start with Jodi. Jodi, you can still go first if you like. I put you on the spot last time, so.
It's okay. So thank you very much. So there are so many opportunities that we really have to make our youth aware of. And it's not just starting at the college level. We really need to start getting to the students early on. I'm talking elementary, middle school, where you're really infusing cybersecurity into the curriculum in a way that they can understand and they can take back to their homes to just basically secure their households. But additionally, by exposing them to cybersecurity principles and concepts at an early age, they know that this can be a career path for them. Very important is that they have to understand that you need a bunch of math and science. So if you don't start taking the appropriate math and science courses in middle school, you're not going to be prepared in high school or even be able to enter college to get into those career paths. So one of the things that we've been doing, so we've been fortunate to be awarded NSA Gen Cyber grants over the past 5 years. And that is where we hold these 1-week cyber camps during the summer for middle and high schoolers just to introduce them to the principles and make them aware of the different career paths. And just this year, we heard from NSA Hawaii that there were several of the interns that actually said that they got into cybersecurity because they went through a Gen Cyber camp in Hawaii. So I'm like, yay, it's working. But it takes time, it takes effort, it's a community that we have to pull together. Our Department of Education is introducing computer science for all, where they're introducing computer sciences from K through 12. So that's becoming part of the curriculum. And I'm gonna do a shout out to my colleague here, Glenn Hernandez from the US Cyber Challenge, because they actually have a goal to try to, again, get more people involved and aware of cybersecurity careers by offering things called the cyber quests, where people can just register and then they can go in and take the challenges and try to get through as many as they can. And then they can see if they have an aptitude for this and a desire and an interest. And then hopefully if they do well, they will be invited to participate in cyber camps, which are basically 1 week, very intense training in terms of cybersecurity. And what that entire program does is identify those in the community that have a passion and a penchant and an aptitude for it, and then maybe we can then pull them into the workforce. This is such a huge problem across our entire nation. So we're trying to get more graduates out of the University of Hawaii. We have multiple programs from all of our community colleges into our 4-year and graduate programs. But also community, talking specifically about girls, the Girl Scouts has a cybersecurity badge. And in fact, they just recently held their STEM Fest at Ford Island for, I think it was 5th through 12th graders, to introduce them to a variety of STEM activities and focuses and disciplines. And that was really interesting because I had to teach, there were 7th graders at the high end, and they were 7-year-olds on the low end, and I was teaching them about cryptography. But you know, they got it. It was really interesting to see some of them coming through and go, I get this, this is really fun, I want to do more of this. And so that's the kind of things that we have to do early on, right? And just make those opportunities available to the students.
That is super exciting. That's really cool. And Ruth, I'd like to go to you next because you have a very, I'll call it a traditional government organization. You've got federal civil servants, and you've also got military folks running through. You know, they do their 2 or 3 year term and then leave, and so you have kind of a balanced workforce. I shouldn't say. I'm sorry, a mixed workforce. Mm-hmm. And what are you all doing at the PEO?
So before I get into the PEO specifically, I will tell you that it was so great to hear what you're doing, because it just reminded me of some things that we've worked on in the past. And some of those included like working with the local universities on curriculum, because a few years back there wasn't cybersecurity curriculum. And so getting that into the universities so that we would have feeders, this is when I was in San Diego, feeders to hire from the local universities. We are also doing things. I just attended an event, and this is was put on between NAVWAR and NAVCEA, and I think NAVAIR, so Navy. It was a Navy event, but it was Hack the Navy, and you know, we put out challenges or problems that we need people to solve. And so 3 problems put out, and thousands, I mean, there was well over 1,000 people at the last event. It was really a great turnout. Everybody come in either individually or in teams to address the challenges, working all weekend on these challenges. And that's a great opportunity then for recruiting and finding the talent to bring people in. We are also, almost all of the Navy organizations are well involved with STEM events, and again, really emphasizing the sciences and math at an early age and trying to get that, people interested in it and get people into those courses to get them prepared to enter engineering and technical degrees. From a PEO perspective, really, we focus on training and education and certifications. But it is a challenge because people come in, you train them up, and then they're off to better, greener pastures, higher pay outside in industry. So it is definitely a challenge. But we do have, the very fact of that, being within DOD, we've got a mission and we've got a lot of folks that come and stay for the mission. And that is a big motivator for us and helps us with some of the retention. But, it is, a lot of it is the training, the education, and not just in cybersecurity, but also, within cloud and the other technologies. We have, within our PEO, we manage a lot of the enterprise licenses. And, we do manage all the enterprise licenses for the Navy, and also ESIs for the overall DoD. And with those, that comes a lot of training opportunities. So one of our big push right now is to make sure that people understand what's out there and are using those training credits so that we don't have them go to waste, and we can actually continue to make our workforce, much better able to handle the challenges coming at us.
Great.
So I think that the issue of the workforce is so severe that all of us have no choice but to start at the elementary school level and really try to help encourage those kinds of programs. And so we very much do that. And then when the kids get into middle school and high school, we like to provide internships so that they can come and work with us in some of these areas. And we find that that's one of the best recruiting tools because, you kind of have an opportunity to see some of the best students and the most motivated students early on, and then they also will have a job when they graduate. The other thing I'd say is, in our industry, and I'm sure this is true in DoD, we have long had a culture of safety, and a lot of the discussion in our industry today is about inculcating a culture of security, so that all the discussion around cybersecurity is not just, the responsibility of the CISO. In fact, it's the responsibility of the entire workforce. And so what we find by doing that is that as people start thinking about those issues in every single job that they do, some of them get much more interested in the technical side of it, and so they end up transferring into the IT group or the cybersecurity group. And that's been a very interesting pattern within our companies. And I love that Jodi mentioned the Girl Scouts. I was just talking with Jen about the fact that the Girl Scouts is also building a STEM center out on the North Shore. And the very interesting story behind that, and I'm not even sure the folks in the military here know about it, but they were chosen as one of 4 programs in the United States by IRT to bring 525 reservists out here for 90 days to actually exercise their skills in helping rebuild communities after disasters. And so they were trying to exercise their construction skills, and they applied that to building the STEM center. So magically, this building has come up on the North Shore virtually overnight. I've never seen permits issued so quickly. They actually had the shell built, and so they're now just at the stage of finishing. And like I say, I don't think anybody in our community even realized what a gift DOD had made in the community.
That's wonderful. Well, let me talk about a few different things. First, I really appreciate the work that all three of these women just talked about in terms of how I discuss it, of growing the pie. We are often looking at how do we get a bigger slice of the pie that's already out there, but we really have to grow the pie, and that's what you're talking about, of encouraging young children to understand what all those options are, help them to be more aware of lots of different careers in cybersecurity, in telecommunications, in related areas like cyber law, like personnel issues related to cybersecurity, policy issues, lots of different things that we need people to do. So it doesn't all have to be technical, but you have to have that aspect of it as well. And it really does have to start very, very early. And so all of those kinds of different camps and youth programs are really important. And it's not just a U.S. national problem. This is a global problem. How many of our coalition partners are out there? Do we have any coalition partners? I don't see any of them. But when I talk to my counterparts in other countries, they talk about the same problem. And oftentimes their people are coming to the United States to work in our industry, and so they've got the same kind of brain drain that we're all worried about. We have that problem because different countries are recruiting them to go there. We globally have got to work on this problem and grow that pie. So a couple of things in what we're doing in the Navy. I'm the senior information professional in the Navy, and so one of the things that the Naval Academy has done is there are actually 2 required courses in cybersecurity that every midshipman in the Navy has to take, one as a freshman and one as a junior. Twice they have to take a cybersecurity class, and so that's fantastic because it may have been something that they had no idea, no interest in, and they may become, that may spark an interest while they're at the Naval Academy. But regardless of whether it does or not, it makes them a better user of the weapons system that is the network when they, ultimately wind up in whatever career that they choose in the Navy or the Marine Corps. So that's really important. In my current job as the director of DISA and commander of Joint Force Headquarters Doden, I also have a blended workforce, and I have to recruit more people and retain and retrain the people that I have in order to be effective in the kinds of work that we need them to be doing. And the technology changes all of the time. So I'm routinely talking to my workforce about being agile as a workforce. They have to be willing to grow and not fear the change that comes with technology, but be ready to learn new things, to be retrained. So this is not just about hitting them when they're young and then saying, okay, that's what we have. We can retrain people, and oftentimes people will decide, oh, I was doing contracting in IT, but I want to become a cybersecurity expert and do that as a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old. That can happen, and we need to encourage that. And the kinds of education programs that we have and developmental programs that we have allow for that within DISA and across the federal government, and certainly within DoD. So we really need to push that. One other aspect that I didn't mention about the young people that I want all of you to take away for your own children, for your nieces and nephews, for your friends' children, is to talk to them about maintaining their clearance eligibility. I know it. It sounds funny, but I have talked to all of my nieces and nephews from the time that they had any clue what that might have meant about don't do stupid things that will shut doors for you in the future. You may think that you never want to have a job with a clearance when you're, 8, 9, 15. But when you're 23, you might decide to and realize, boy, I wish I hadn't done whatever stupid thing it was that got me in trouble as a teenager.
And posted it, right?
And So it's really, really important that we're doing that with our young people. Make sure that they're eligible. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily, you're telling them, hey, you might want to join the military someday, but you might want to work in the federal government or in industry where you have to have a clearance and be able to do that.
Well, I love all the thoughts that were shared and the exciting things. It's easy to think about, oh, woe is us and all these problems, but when you hear about all the cool things that are happening, it's really exciting. I would be remiss if I didn't share too, through working with Girls Who Code, if you haven't heard of the organization, you should look it up, but Girls Who Code has grown exponentially to help young girls kind of get into STEM. One thing I learned is that talking about the junior high age, that's usually the point where girls precipitously drop off from their interest in STEM. And that's because they start to be very aware that, oh, I'm the only girl and there's a bunch of boys, or this isn't cool, or, my friends want me to go do these other fun things instead of like studying. So if you have preteens or young teenage girls in your life, I would say to kind of give them an extra nudge to stick it out, because that is where they kind of go away and don't come back. So that's my contribution to that one. We have about 10 minutes left. I know there's tons of questions, so could you queue up another question from the audience, please? Okay, contemporary cyber attacks can have more substantial impacts if they affect data integrity or have disinformation. That's scary. This can cause a lack of trust in information, news, and institutions. How do you approach maintaining integrity of data and information differently than you would confidentiality or availability? So real quick, integrity is, it's like fake data. Somebody gets in and they manipulate data to appear to be something that it isn't. So great question, and who would like to start?
We're all pausing. This is really hard. So from the university's perspective, we actually have implemented what we call a data governance program, where we're identifying the critical information assets for the university, and then around that data, ensuring that we have controls, especially where you want to minimize access to only those that need to have it. So when we're in this process where we're taking away access that people used to have and making people very angry at us. But again, because what you want to do is to reduce the, we call it the attack surface, reduce the amount of people that can get to that data and manipulate that data perhaps for malicious purposes. But it really is, talking about the whole information security aspect of it. If you can prevent the access to the data, and if you can audit and have accountability around access to that data, and make sure people understand that you can audit and you can see when they touch that data, then I think it will secure that a little bit more. I'm going to leave it at that because we're short on time.
Yes, so one of the efforts that I've been pushing as the commander of Joint Force Headquarters Doden is changing from a concept of allow all, deny by exception to deny all, allow by exception. And that is a really dramatic change. Like you said, it makes a lot of people mad because they say, oh, it was so much easier before. Well, we shouldn't be pushing for easy. We should be pushing for secure, and that includes security of the integrity of our data. So these kinds of zero trust principles, data-centric security, where we're really trying to protect the availability and the confidentiality and the integrity of that data, and particularly the critical data, is what what we're really looking for, and getting a lot of help from industry on how best to approach that in the networks that we already have, as well as looking at new technology, new capability that we can put into future networks.
I guess the only thing I'd say is that, if I think about our financial services side, banking has always worried about data integrity, because you all don't want money to disappear from your checking accounts, right? So, it's all about policies and procedures, and exactly what was said about, who can actually input the data, and then having checks on the data. And then who can change any of that, and making sure that you record the history of anyone who has touched that. So it's kind of all the very basic stuff that you would think about.
Okay, let's see, we've got 5 minutes. I wanted to ask one kind of rapid fire question, and that is, we saw there's the hands went up, there's a lot of folks from industry. Show me again, who's here from industry? Okay, great. So this question is an ask question. So if you could ask the technology industry to develop or deliver or make readily available one technology to improve your organization's cybersecurity posture, what would it be? And we'll just go down the line. So Admiral Norton.
Well, mine is how to have confidence in and validate the configuration of our network. We can do that at any point in time and think that we know exactly what's happening on the network, but 1 minute later, the next person that changes something is changing something that might be critical to the security of the network. So being able to understand what's happening end to end across the entire DODN, which is pretty massive, of that kind of validation and verification.
Great. Connie?
So my answer may be too general, but it's about AI, because there's so many processes that we do now that are manual, and to the extent that we can start, we have technology developed that can recognize patterns and start automating a lot more of the checks so that we can look more at the exceptions. That really would help the efficiency and also just the coverage of the potential vulnerabilities.
Okay. Thank you. Ruth?
So I'm very much aligned with Admiral Norton, and that
I told you we share a brain.
Automation for us. So it's automation and really understanding our network, being able to manage our network and defend our network using automation, and really reducing our manpower requirements by doing that and increasing our cybersecurity as a result of it. And I know I will say I have been out walking the floor a bit, visiting, and when I was harping on automation, sitting on this, not this panel, but another AFCEA conference a few years back, I will tell you that things have just progressed so much. There's so many new cutting edge capabilities as I walk out there, and it's like, wow, where was this a year ago? So I think what we're asking for really is being delivered. It's now a matter of us going out there and really taking it. And sometimes it's multiple tools to deliver the capabilities that we need, but working that integration piece to really get these things into our networks and into our systems.
So since you already took care of the network piece, what I want is the ability for information systems to automatically tag files that have sensitive information, automatically encrypt it and protect it, including ensuring that the systems that they're housed on are also protected automagically, right? We eliminate the human part of that, and it will automatically take care of itself just based on the data elements that you throw into that file. So when you invent that, let me know. I want to be your first prototyper.
Okay, so Splunk booth 707. You should all come to Splunk for a demo. No, thank you all for your openness and your honesty and candidness and sharing what you're doing well, what you're not doing, what you need some help with. I really appreciate it. Thank you to the audience for your questions. I need to say again, thank you to the sponsors, to AFCEA International, to everybody who puts on this wonderful event, and we look forward to seeing you all. Oh, wait, no, there's some other comments. I'm sorry. I almost broke the rules. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Just to echo what Juliana was saying, I just want to take a moment. Is it on?